Hello and welcome back to my office hours. I'm Robert Reich and you are here and I'm with you. And we're doing this again. And be sure, if you would be so kind as to let your friends just share this with your friends, because we're going to do this for half an hour. You can come back to it later, but this is the live thing. This is the real thing. This is the real McCoy. This is sort of you and I and a few other people actually engaging in discussion about what's going on today, these days, in this crazy political economic system and season we are now in. Have you ever seen anything like this? I'm blown away. I mean, every day I feel, as many of you do, kind of a combination of fear and outrage and some degree of hope. Of course, there's a lot of hope. I'm optimistic, basically. Are you? I mean, really. I mean, if you look at what we have been through as a country and what we have kind of demonstrated to ourselves about our resilience, we'll come out fine, but it's not necessary that it's going to be easy. Tonight's Republican debate, I want to start with this Republican debate. Here's my, what do you think of my caricatures? Rubio and Trump and Cruz. And now the whole thing tonight, basically the plot tonight, I'm not urging you to watch, I'm just telling you, the plot tonight is that obviously Rubio and Cruz are going to try to get Trump off his steamroller. They're going to try to slow him down because tonight's the last time before Super Tuesday. Next Tuesday, the big kind of sweepstakes, that they're going to have an opportunity to really attack Trump. And who knows what they're going to say, but what they really want Trump to do is lose his cool, demonstrate once again that he is not presidential, and unfortunately, because I think Trump is very dangerous for the country, unfortunately I think they're going to fail. And they're going to fail because Donald Trump represents to many people in this country the antithesis of the establishment, the antithesis of how a politician ought to normally behave. And people don't trust politicians. They hate politicians. They hate the establishment. And so every time Donald Trump goes kind of off message or sounds like normal people speak, even though he may be using words that presidential candidates should not use, even though he says things that are politically incorrect, a lot of people say, right on, he's not a politician. I like that. And unfortunately, they don't listen to the policies that he's evincing and some of the bigotry that he represents. Or they say to themselves on occasion, you know, I feel the same way. So it's going to be very hard for Rubio and for Cruz and for the Republican establishment. By the way, there are a lot of big donor Republicans who are extremely upset about the rise of Trump because they can't control Trump the same way they normally can control Republican candidates. Now again, this is not in any way, shape, or form an endorsement of Donald Trump. I think he is dangerous. He's out of his mind. He's a reckless, kind of narcissistic nutcase. You get my point? And just to illustrate my point, I don't know if you've been following the last couple of days, but Mitt Romney, you remember Mitt Romney? Mitt Romney accused Trump of hiding some bombshell in his tax returns, and therefore says to Trump, you've got to show your tax returns. You've got to reveal them because there is likely to be some big bombshell there. Now, of course, the irony is, you may remember, Mitt Romney in 2012, he was not going to reveal his tax returns. And Senator Harry Reid said, you know, there must be something there. In fact, he hasn't even paid any taxes for the last 10 years. And Mitt Romney was kind of shamed and forced politically to disclose his tax returns, which showed that he, although a multi-millionaire, was paying only about less than 14% in taxes. His tax rate was almost nothing. Now, Trump, in response today to Romney's demand that Trump provide his tax returns, Trump today said, in the usual Trumpian fashion, kind of a Trumploid remark, Mitt Romney, who was one of the dumbest and worst candidates in the history of Republican politics, is now pushing me on tax returns, period. Dope. period. Now, let me ask you, do you think it's appropriate for a presidential aspirant to call another presidential candidate a dumbest and a dope? I mean, those words, you shouldn't, I mean, people in public life should not be calling other people dumb and dopes using epithets like that. I mean, anybody who does that. I mean, Trump is a moron. All right. Speaking of kind of moronic moves, I'm not saying anybody's a moron, but speaking of weird things that are going on, here is the delegate count. The delegate count in the Democratic nomination process already. Now, what you can see here is that you've got Bernie Sanders. He has 51 delegates pledged to him. And you have here Hillary Clinton, who has 52 delegates pledged to her. This is after Iowa and Nevada and New Hampshire. So you've got Bernie with 51 and Hillary with 52. But then you've got another category of delegates. They're called superdelegates. Now follow me, because Bernie has, at best, 19 superdelegates. And Hillary has, so far, 450 superdelegates. Now, if you add up these columns, 51 pledged to Bernie in the primaries and caucuses, and 19 Bernie thinks that are pledged to him are superdelegates, he gets a total of 70. And then you add up Hillary's 52 that she's got from Iowa and New Hampshire and from Iowa, New Hampshire, and Nevada. And she's got 52, but then add in 450 that she also has pledged to her. That's 502. So what is this superdelegate thing? Well, superdelegates are political insiders. They are state politicians, state Democrats, governors. They are senators, members of Congress, and they are the kind of Democratic political inside establishment. Now, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who's head of the Democratic National Committee, when she was asked by Jake Tapper very recently on CNN about how she can justify all of these superdelegates. The Republican Party, by the way, doesn't have superdelegates. The Democratic Party still has all these superdelegates, all these insiders. And she was asked, how can she justify them? And she said, and I quote, "Superdelegates are there so elected officials don't have to run against grassroots activists." I'm going to read that again because every time I look at this, I can't believe she said this. I actually heard her say this. She said, now this is the head of the DNC, "Superdelegates are there so elected officials don't have to run against grassroots activists." Now, can I just talk to Debbie Wasserman Schultz for just a second? Debbie, I know you. I know you, so I can call you Debbie. Everybody else, you can watch. Debbie, I want to just be clear, all right? This campaign season is about trust, and there's a lot of distrust toward insiders, toward the Democratic establishment. Debbie, are you there? Do you get this? There's a lot of distrust. And Hillary Clinton, is, fortunately or unfortunately for her, dubbed part of the establishment. So, Debbie, by saying something like this and having all of these superdelegates who are not pledged to the winners of the caucuses or the primaries, but pledged just because they have influence in the party to Hillary, you're making it seem as if the dice are loaded. The system is rigged. So it's not a good idea, Debbie. Right? So will you do me a favor and make sure that every delegate, including the superdelegates, pledges to support the majority candidate? All right? Okay, I just want to bring up because I want to use this half hour for talking about things that are not adequately talked about. And here's another thing that's not adequately talked about, the Republican tax plans. Now, Cruz and Rubio and Trump have all put out their tax plans. Here's the thing that is not being reported on. Their tax plans reduce government revenues over the next 10 years, if they were put into effect, by an average of $12 trillion. 12 trillion, not billion, $12 trillion. Now, most of this money, and this is bigger than, far bigger on a proportional basis in terms of the economy than Ronald Reagan's tax cuts or George W. Bush's. These are the biggest potential tax cuts and revenue losses to the federal government that we have ever experienced. But you see, the thing is, none of these three Republicans is talking about where those revenues are going to be made up. And the other thing that's important is almost all of the benefits of these tax cuts go to the people at the top, to people who are making over $500,000 a year or over $1 million a year. These are the people who get the benefits of all these tax cuts, these $12 trillion in tax cuts over the next 10 years. They go to the top. And what's going to happen? Either the deficit is going to explode, I mean totally explode. You've got all these boomers, these baby boomers like me, who are, we need Medicare and we need Social Security, and we're going to be taking a lot of that money in the future. And so who's going to get hurt? It's the poor, the near poor, the lower middle class. That's what this is all about. Why isn't this being reported on? Two more things and on the economy, and I don't want to dwell on them because I know you're more interested in politics than the economy, but they're related to the economy. One is the retail stores. This is actually very important. We've got right now a bunch of big retail establishments that are closing down. They're closing their stores. Not all of them, they're just closing their stores. Kohl's closing 18 stores. Sears, 50 stores. Macy's, Walmart, JCPenney, they're all closing their stores. Now, why are they doing that? For two reasons. One, because Amazon is getting a huge amount of retail trade that used to go to these stores. And secondly, because average Americans don't any longer have the cash. Now, what does this mean? Well, what it means is not only do we have a large middle class and poor population that can't keep the economy going as it used to be able to keep the economy going, but even more absurdly and in ways that undermine the entire economy, where have most of the jobs been created in the economy over the last 15 years? In the retail sector of the economy. Do you get the drift? As Amazon takes more retail sales, as Americans are incapable, simply because they're not making enough money, of buying more, then all of these retail jobs start vanishing. And what's going to happen to even the small amounts of money and jobs that people have? This is a problem. This is a potential problem. It's a political problem. You wonder about what is all of the anger and where is all the anger in the system. A lot of the anger in the system is coming from the fact that the typical family today is earning less, adjusted for inflation, than it was earning in 2000. And the jobs are less secure today than they were then. And people are lashing out. They don't feel that they're going to live as well as their parents. Their expectations are being hurt. Oh, I wanted to also mention the banks. I don't want to depress you. This is something just to watch out for. European banks are in very, very bad shape. They have a lot of loans out to oil and gas, and they are in the midst of very depressed or recession-driven economies. And the thing you need to worry about is that a lot of American banks are very closely entwined with the European banks. And we still do not have any method for winding down American banks that get into trouble. We've been there before. Okay, this is the big deal. Can I have a drum roll, please? Drum roll. Imagine a drum roll. The worst of the week. My nominee this week for the worst of the week is none other than Mitch McConnell, Senate Majority Leader. Now, Mitch McConnell, as you know, is not allowing, or he says he doesn't want to allow, President Obama to get his Supreme Court nominee voted on. And I want to read you what Mitch McConnell said a couple of days ago. He said, presidents have a right to nominate just as the Senate has a constitutional right to provide or withhold consent. In this case, the Senate will withhold it. That is consent. Now, Mitch McConnell is right on the first sentence. That is, presidents do have a right to nominate just as the Senate has a constitutional right to withhold consent. But the Senate Majority Leader doesn't have a right to usurp the rights of all of the senators to make that kind of vote. The Senate Majority Leader can't say to all the Democrats and any Republicans that might be willing to vote for an Obama appointee, you don't have the right to vote. That violates the Constitution. All right? In my view, my humble opinion, Mitch McConnell, if he does this, if he refuses to put Obama's nominee for the Supreme Court up for a vote, is in violation of the United States Constitution. Now, what can we do about it? Short of watching, kind of marching on Washington, I don't know. I'd be interested in your thoughts. What can be done? The Oscars are coming up Sunday. I'm not interested. Are you interested in the Oscars? Forget it. All right, your questions. Let's turn to your questions. And question number one, this is from Lynn Hennard. Hennard, Lynn? Is that how you pronounce it? Is there any way Bernie can overcome Hillary's overwhelming hold on superdelegates? Well, Lynn, we talked about it a little bit just now. I think we've got to, all of us, and this is not, by the way, this is not about Bernie versus Hillary. Sometimes this seems very, very kind of internecine warfare. I want you to know, and I think all of you should join me in kind of committing ourselves. Whoever becomes the Democratic nominee, we're going to work our fannies off to make sure that that Democrat becomes the next president, because the alternative is going to be much, much worse. So let's not, this is not about Bernie versus Hillary. This is about democracy. And I think what we need to do is we need to, and I put up actually a petition on Facebook, on my Facebook page, on this page. Actually, you're watching my Facebook page now. There's a petition on this page, and I'd like you to join the petition. And the petition basically is to the superdelegates asking that they pledge to support the nominee who has, or the candidate who has most of the votes. I don't see anything else we can do with. Okay, this is from Alberto Fonseca. Do you think superdelegates contribute to or take away from the democratic process? I think they take away from the democratic process. I think it's very interesting, by the way, that the Republicans do not have superdelegates. Next question. David Robinson. Will the Supreme Court of the United States itself have to clarify the constitutional powers and process to choose one of its own? Well, it may be that the case, this issue, goes to the Supreme Court in terms of whether or not the Senate has a constitutional obligation to allow all members of the Senate to vote on a presidential nominee. But it's a complicated issue. How does it get to the Supreme Court? Who has standing to actually raise this as a lawsuit to the Supreme Court? And by the way, there are only 8 justices. If it were split between Democratic and Republican appointees, you have the absurd outcome that the Supreme Court could not even make a decision on the question of who and how we get the next Supreme Court justice. Okay, next question is Elise Menahan. Who will Obama appoint to the Supreme Court? Well, I'm not a mind reader, Elise, but my latest information is that Nevada Governor Brian Sandoval is in the lead in terms of the nomination race. He is a moderate. He was a trial court attorney. He is a Republican. He's a Hispanic, but the big news is he's a Republican. And I think the White House is now thinking that this is the way to put pressure on Mitch McConnell and the Republican senators, because if they don't even want to have a vote on a Republican nominee, they are really obviously stepping on the entire constitutional process. They are violating the whole basic structure of our system. So that this may be a device to embarrass them. Sandoval, from what I know, is not bad. In fact, his record has been pretty good. He has supported Medicaid expansion under the Affordable Care Act. He has actually had an exchange under the Affordable Care Act. In fact, he's the only Republican governor both to have expanded Medicaid and to have an exchange under the Affordable Care Act. He's done some very constructive things on voter and voting. He's turned down a bill on voter ID. I think he's very pro-choice. He's I think he's probably the most liberal of all 29 Republican governors. Okay, Edmund Rudolph, you ask, why are we afraid of nominating a liberal judge? Only Democrats can believe that throwing the game gives them a win. Well, Edmund, I don't think it's a matter of being afraid. I think it's a matter of actually getting a judge or a nominee through the Senate. And, of course, you can do something symbolic. And Obama could nominate somebody who is very, very distinguished and very liberal, like Lawrence Tribe, for example, who is an eminent Supreme Court scholar at Harvard Law School and one of the, I think, most knowledgeable people in the entire United States, but a progressive and a Democrat. But, of course, that nomination would never get through the Senate. It would just be it would be symbolic. And I think that Obama would like to use this opportunity on the kind of off chance. I mean, it's a possibility that we may have a Republican president. I hate to even say it. Forget I even said that, all right? I didn't say that. I didn't say it. Mike Johnson, could you please talk about what is likely to happen to our economy should the Republicans win the presidency and continue to hold the House and Senate? Mike, you really want me to talk about this? You want to get depressed? Because it is depressing. I mean, if they have the entire system, if they have the House and the Senate, and they have the presidency, and then there's a tie on the Supreme Court, so the Supreme Court really can't resolve anything, you are going to probably have a new Supreme Court justice that is a Republican, so they take it all. They have all three branches. What happens to the economy? You've got tax cuts for the rich. We've already talked about that. You have huge cuts in every safety net program for the rest of us. You might as well kiss goodbye. Higher education, federal aid education, federal infrastructure programs, federal programs for the poor. You can basically, the federal government becomes essentially it becomes national security. I mean, the Republicans would even, and they've already threatened to do this, and Paul Ryan and his plans have threatened to do this, they would erode, contract Medicare. They hate Medicare, and they hate Social Security. They are still angry about the Social Security Act being passed in 1935. I mean, they're still holding a grudge about 1935, Mike. So I don't want to, look, there's not enough depressing talk for today. All right, Camille Lee. Who of the Republican candidates is the biggest threat? I think Cruz is creepy. That's you, Camille. Well, I think I agree with you, actually. But it's hard to, choose between Cruz and Rubio and Trump. I mean, they're all creepy. I mean, they're Cruz is a right-wing nut job. I mean, this is my opinion, obviously. Rubio is considered to be moderate, but he's not moderate. If you look at his record on any of these social issues or on taxes or on anything else that is important, he is as much to the right as is Cruz. And Donald Trump is temperamentally ill-suited to be president of the United States. He is a bigot. Do I need to remind you? All right, Jim Hooley. What do you make of the 4 former chairs of the Council of Economic Advisors from the Obama and Clinton administrations finding Bernie Sanders' economic plan to be, quote unquote, unrealistic? Jim, you know, they're entitled to their opinion, but others have very different opinion. In fact, Jamie Galbraith, for example, who was the executive director of the Joint Economic Committee, which is the congressional equivalent of the Council of Economic Advisors, finds their position, that is these 4 Council of Economic Advisors heads, to be completely wrong, and finds that, in fact, Bernie Sanders' estimates in his plan are very, very realistic. I mean, what Bernie Sanders is saying is that he could get the economy to go at a 5.3% annualized rate of growth. We had that in the early 80s. That's not impossible. And he's also saying we could get unemployment down to 3.8%. We almost got there in the late 1990s. That's not impossible. I mean, if you don't aim high, why bother aiming at all? Okay, Ralph Rizzuto. What does Europe and China think of Bernie? Ralph, I have no idea. Next question. Barry Nicken. What do you think of the description of politics as, quote, the art of compromise, unquote? Barry, I think that there has to be a lot of compromise in politics, but the big issue that's being left out of the people who say it's all about compromise is the people behind the politicians. That is, if the public is organized and mobilized and energized about an issue, then the compromise is going to be very, very close to what the people want, because the people are putting pressure on the politicians. You know, back in 1936, I don't remember this, but I read it. Franklin D. Roosevelt was running for president again, and FDR was badgered by a voter who said, Mr. President, if you are reelected, I want you to promise to do this and this and this and this, and if you make this promise, I'll support you. And according to the story, Roosevelt turned around and said, ma'am, I'd like to do everything you just asked me to do, but if I'm reelected, you must make me. You must make me. Do you understand that? The reason Roosevelt said is, you must make me, is even in the 1930s. And in the 1930s, we were not nearly as top-heavy and filled with political contributions and moneyed interests as we are now. But even in the 1930s, a president of the United States says to a voter, you have got to exert your power as a voter to make me do what I want to do, because I am otherwise dealing with an impossible situation in terms of special interests here in Washington. Well, that's exactly the case. So, yes, the art of compromise, that's important, but compromise is going to get us nowhere unless the public is really mobilized and organized and energized for what is good. Or another way of saying this is that regardless of who we send to Washington, how good the people are we send to Washington, nothing good will happen unless good people outside Washington are organized and mobilized to force it to happen. And on that upbeat note, we're going to end our questions. I want to, we have the last question. We have the last question. I'm sorry, I'm just being told we have Diane Bolourier. Diane, did I pronounce it correctly? What country should we move to if Trump is elected? I don't want to answer that question. I don't want to move anywhere. This is my country. It's your country. Trump is not going to get elected. Anyway, thanks to Zoe, Z-O-E, Umlaut, Beck, and Yael Bridge, who unfortunately is not here today. Yael is in Toledo, Ohio. Yael, I hope you're enjoying the weather there. Bye, everybody. See you next week.